All right, let's also tell you how President Donald Trump has announced a ceasefire with Iran, claiming a complete victory. But this announcement has done very little to silence the growing calls from the Democrats for his removal. More than 85 Democrat lawmakers have now called for President Trump to be impeached or removed via the 25th Amendment. And most of these calls were triggered by Trump's threat to bomb Iran and end a whole civilization. That's the post he put out yesterday. Lawmakers Sri Thanedar and Jasmine Crockett sent letters to Vice President J.D. Vance and the cabinet asking to remove Trump by invoking the 25th Amendment to the Constitution.
Hey guys, welcome. Adam is here. So what just happened? The 25th Amendment has been invoked, Vance is sworn in, and Trump is still inside the White House when his legal team calls with the worst news yet. Judge Emmet Sullivan wants him in federal court immediately. Sullivan isn't issuing a fine or a procedural penalty. He's delivering a criminal contempt ruling with a life sentence on the table and an ultimatum no president has ever heard in American history.
In some ways, vice presidents are like understudies. You may never need them to step into the breach, but they're there just in case something goes wrong. So I want you to consider the following. Donald Trump, who's currently 78 years old and regularly frequents McDonald's and loves his Diet Cokes, would end his second term as the oldest person ever to serve as president of the United States. In fact, he'd be 82 years, 7 months, and 6 days when his term would end in January of 2029. But Trump refuses to release even the most basic information about his health. Kind of makes you wonder, what's he hiding? And not to mention his rambling, meandering speeches have led to mental health experts going on the record concerned about potential cognitive decline. Trump's history of shocking gaffes and outbursts suggests that things are just going to go even further downhill from here. So what happens if Donald Trump dies or becomes incapacitated and can no longer serve as president? Section 1 of the 25th Amendment states that in that event, the vice president becomes the president automatically.
Resign within 24 hours or federal marshals are coming through that door to arrest you. In that precise moment, that exact second when Sullivan's words penetrate Trump's consciousness, something fundamental fractures. Not metaphorically, not politically, literally, psychologically, completely. Because at this juncture, there exists no remaining escape route. The Senate has already voted to remove him from office.
So I'm going to state it plainly. J.D. Vance is a heartbeat away from the presidency of the United States. Vance has poll numbers labeling him the least popular vice presidential candidate of the 21st century. Unsurprising, given his many extremist views on everything from child care to the truth of who won the 2020 election.
He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
J.D. Vance already occupies the Oval Office as the constitutionally recognized president. The judiciary is closing every available exit. The legal noose draws tighter with each passing minute. And Sullivan is essentially communicating the inescapable reality. The presidency has been terminated, and now prison approaches with the certainty of nightfall.
Representative John Larson, on the other hand, introduced articles of impeachment against Trump. However, just before the end of the deadline to act on his threat, Donald Trump announced the 2-week truce with Iran. But several House Democrats made clear their calls for Trump's removal still stand despite disagreement. But minutes after Trump's announcement, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez renewed her calls for Trump to be impeached, saying that the Republican president's announcement on a temporary ceasefire changes nothing. She's claimed that President has threatened a genocide and that he must be removed from office, whether by his cabinet or the Congress.
You may resign and potentially negotiate a reduced sentence, or you may refuse and spend the remainder of your natural life in federal custody. Those constitute the only two options remaining on the table. And Donald Trump, for the first authentic time in his entire existence, fully internalizes that he is genuinely losing. He will not prevail. He will not discover some obscure legal loophole. He will not talk his way past this catastrophe. He will not manipulate the media narrative to his advantage. He is going to federal prison, or he is going to resign in absolute humiliation. Those represent the sole choices available. And so Trump breaks. He begins weeping inside the courtroom. The audio recording equipment captures every sound. Everyone present hears it. His attorneys are frantically begging Sullivan for a 30-minute recess to compose their client. Trump keeps repeating the same phrases in a loop of despair. It is over. It is all finished. I cannot continue this any longer. The entire courtroom observes the sitting president, though technically the former president now, due to the 25th Amendment's successful invocation, experiencing a complete emotional and psychological disintegration because he has been cornered by the judicial branch. Because no escape hatch exists. Because the legal system has finally, after years of pursuit, captured its target. In that moment, that image of Trump sobbing uncontrollably in federal court, that recording spreads everywhere instantaneously. Every news network broadcasts it. Every social media platform amplifies it. International news services transmit it globally. The entire planet watches the precise second when Donald Trump finally comprehends that he has been defeated absolutely, and then begins the agonizing waiting period. Trump's legal counsel implores him to resign. They explain the calculus with brutal clarity. If you resign, perhaps we can negotiate. Perhaps we can secure a pardon from President Vance. Perhaps we can avoid the life sentence entirely, but Sullivan has established an immovable deadline. Noon tomorrow, 24 hours, and Trump must decide. Does he resign in public disgrace? Does he accept that his presidency has evaporated and his personal liberty hangs by a thread? Or does he refuse and watch federal marshals approach with handcuffs and transport vehicles? The pressure is suffocating. The isolation is absolute. Sullivan's words echo continuously through his consciousness. Life sentence, federal marshals, arrest, 24 hours. And somewhere in the darkness of that endless night consumed by desperation, Trump records a voice message consisting of 2 words. Help me. That is what he has been reduced to. Help me. Not threats, not defiance, just raw, unfiltered desperation. Just a shattered human being reaching out because literally no other destination exists. This is the moment that actually destroys Donald Trump completely. Not the 25th Amendment vote, not the accumulated legal defeats. This moment when a federal judge wielding genuine contempt authority looks directly at him and declares that his presidency has concluded and his freedom now hangs in the balance. This is when Trump finally shatters. And that is the scenario we are examining. That is what terminates his presidency, not solely politically, but personally. That is the instant when he realizes everything is authentically finished. Let us examine precisely what Judge Emmet Sullivan actually possesses the legal authority to execute here, because this represents the critical understanding most people fail to fully appreciate regarding federal judges. Contempt power. Judges hold genuine contempt authority, not theoretical authority, not something they threaten but never actually deploy. Real, enforceable power to hold individuals in contempt and to remand them to prison. And Sullivan is not some timid jurist who will retreat when confronted by presidential pressure. Sullivan is not someone who treats court orders as optional suggestions. Sullivan has occupied the federal bench for decades. Sullivan has held corporations and individuals in contempt previously. Sullivan has sent people to prison for contempt previously. Sullivan understands precisely how to wield this power and precisely when to deploy it. And Sullivan has observed Trump defy court orders repeatedly throughout this entire legal nightmare. Trump has been ordered to surrender documents and has refused. Trump has been ordered to comply with discovery requests and has declined. Trump has been ordered to appear for depositions and has ignored those orders completely. Sullivan has exercised extraordinary patience, but that patience possesses definitive limits. Sullivan examines the evidence arrayed before him. All of it, every page of documentation, every email communication, every internal memorandum. He reviews the courtroom testimony where a witness broke down completely and screamed that Trump personally ordered a blackout of the Epstein client list. He examines the Bondi Memorandum demonstrating that Trump was directly involved in ordering the cover-up and the suppression of evidence. He reviews the Patel testimony where perjury was committed under oath in an attempt to protect Trump and conceal the truth. He studies the flight logs from the aircraft. He examines the communications from years past. He evaluates everything together as a coherent whole. And Sullivan reaches the only conclusion rationally available. This constitutes witness tampering. This constitutes obstruction of justice. This directly violates the federal statute governing such conduct. And that statute does not carry minor penalties. That statute carries mandatory minimum sentencing requirements. That statute can result in substantial prison time. That statute can result in a life sentence. And Sullivan possesses the authority to enforce that statute by holding Trump in contempt. So Sullivan issues the ruling. He presents Trump with an ultimatum. Resign within 24 hours or federal marshals will arrest you on witness tampering charges. And here is the crucial element. Sullivan understands that Trump no longer serves as president due to the 25th Amendment's successful invocation. Vance is president now. Therefore, Trump no longer enjoys presidential immunity from prosecution. Trump no longer retains the power to pardon himself. Trump no longer commands the Department of Justice to dismiss charges. Trump has suddenly become a private citizen who stands on the precipice of arrest for serious federal crimes. And Sullivan is essentially communicating a straightforward proposition. I am offering you one pathway out of this catastrophe. You may resign and potentially negotiate with President Vance. Perhaps Vance will consider extending a pardon. Perhaps you can avoid prison entirely. But if you refuse to resign, if you persist in fighting, if you continue defying my court orders, then I am deploying federal marshals and you will spend the remainder of your existence in federal prison. That ultimatum lands with completely different force than anything Trump has previously encountered because Trump finally comprehends that the game has actually concluded. He is not proceeding to appellate court and prevailing through legal maneuvering. He is not talking his way out of this with lawyers and briefs and oral arguments before higher courts. He is not spinning this successfully in the media environment. He is not mobilizing his base to rescue him. The only remaining question is how severely he will lose and how much prison time he will ultimately face. And when Trump finally processes that reality, when he genuinely internalizes that he is authentically cornered with no escape route available, that is when he fractures emotionally and psychologically. Because Trump can manage political pressure under normal circumstances. Trump can manage legal pressure when it remains years away and filtered through legal counsel. Trump can manage abstract threats and distant consequences. But Trump cannot manage the immediate reality of federal prison. Trump cannot manage the concrete fact that marshals are approaching. Trump cannot manage the immediate prospect of losing his freedom and watching his power and his wealth become meaningless behind steel bars. So he weeps. Trump experiences an authentic emotional collapse in Sullivan's courtroom. Trump disintegrates completely. Trump cannot maintain composure any longer. His attorneys are pleading with Sullivan for a 30-minute recess because Trump is experiencing a total meltdown. Trump repeats the same phrases in an endless loop. It is over. It is all finished. I cannot do this anymore. I cannot handle this situation. And everyone present in the courtroom hears it. Everyone witnesses it. The audio recording captures it permanently. The moment is preserved, and it disseminates everywhere immediately. Every news network broadcasts the audio. Every international news service covers the story. Social media detonates with the content. The entire world observes the moment when the most powerful president in modern memory shatters completely because he has been cornered and no escape exists. In that moment, that image of Trump weeping in court, understanding that prison approaches, that is the image that defines the termination of his presidency. Not the political speeches, not the election victories, not the policy achievements, but that moment of complete emotional disintegration when Trump finally comprehends he has authentically lost. Now Vance observes all of this unfolding from the Oval Office in real time. Vance has occupied the presidency for merely a few hours. Vance continues receiving comprehensive briefings on everything. Vance remains in the process of transitioning into the role. And now Sullivan issues this contempt ruling and forces Trump into an impossible position. And Vance must render a critical decision. Does Vance attempt to assist Trump? Does Vance contact Sullivan and attempt to convince him to retreat? Does Vance pardon Trump or order a stay on the contempt ruling? Does Vance attempt to leverage his presidential power to protect his predecessor? Vance's calculation is straightforward and absolutely unambiguous. If Vance intervenes and halts the prosecution, if Vance attempts to shield Trump, if Vance pardons Trump or suspends the contempt ruling, then Vance appears directly complicit in the cover-up. Vance appears compromised. Vance appears as though the new president protects the old president from justice. And that destroys Vance's presidency before it genuinely commences. That renders Vance weak. That suggests Vance is not his own independent actor. That indicates Vance belongs to Trump's corrupt inner circle. So Vance selects a different course. Vance does not intervene. Vance does not contact Sullivan requesting mercy. Vance does not pardon Trump. Vance does not attempt to obstruct the prosecution. Vance permits Sullivan to execute what Sullivan intends to execute. Vance does not attempt to prevent federal marshals from performing their duties. Vance allows the courts to function without any political interference whatsoever, and in taking this action, Vance actually purifies the presidency of Trump contamination. Vance actually grants himself a fresh beginning. Vance actually permits the legal system to operate fairly and independently without political manipulation from the Oval Office. And that decision, that deliberate choice to allow the judiciary to fulfill its constitutional role, is what actually enables Trump to confront genuine justice and genuine consequences. And that constitutes the moment when everything transforms, because now Trump is authentically alone. Vance refuses to assist him. The courts are advancing against him. His attorneys are instructing him to resign. His party has abandoned him entirely. His supporters cannot do anything to salvage his situation. And Sullivan's deadline approaches relentlessly, noon tomorrow, 24 hours, and Trump must decide. The pressure becomes so intense, the isolation becomes so complete, that Trump finally records that voice message. Help me. Not a threat. Not a social media post. Just help me. A desperate man reaching outward because no other direction remains. Let us examine precisely what transpires in the hours following Sullivan's delivery of that contempt ruling, because this is where the scenario becomes absolutely authentic and the dominoes begin falling faster than anyone anticipated. First, Trump's entire legal team assembles inside the White House. His attorneys, his advisors, everyone congregates in his private space, and they communicate the situation with unambiguous clarity and without any spin whatsoever. Sullivan possesses the legal authority to execute this action. Sullivan can order federal marshals to arrest you immediately. Sullivan can impose a life sentence under the witness tampering statute. The evidence is overwhelming. The Bondi memorandum demonstrates you directly ordered the obstruction. The witness testimony establishes the cover-up definitively. The flight logs demonstrate your involvement. The Patel perjury demonstrates the coordination. And you no longer retain presidential immunity because you were removed through the 25th Amendment. Vance is president now. You are now a private citizen. You possess no special protection. You possess no special status. You are subject to identical laws as every other citizen. So what do we do? How do we respond? What constitutes the strategy? And the legal advice is essentially unanimous and entirely consistent. Resign. You must resign immediately. Exit government. Exit the White House. Resign from any remaining positions you may hold. Perhaps cooperate with prosecutors. Perhaps agree to provide testimony. Perhaps negotiate a plea arrangement. Perhaps you avoid the worst possible outcome. Perhaps you avoid a life sentence. But if you remain in the White House, if you persist in fighting, if you continue defying Sullivan's orders, if you remain in the line of fire, then you are proceeding to prison. That is not a possibility. That is not a maybe. That is a certainty. Federal marshals will arrive. You will be arrested. You will face trial. You will be convicted. And you will spend the remainder of your existence in federal prison. And Trump does not wish to hear this assessment. Trump is accustomed to attorneys discovering legal loopholes and technical arguments that extract him from difficulty. Trump is accustomed to appeals and delays and strategic litigation extending for years. Trump is accustomed to his legal team identifying some mechanism to make problems disappear or become diminished. But no winning strategy exists here. No loophole exists. No appeal will prevent Sullivan from enforcing this contempt ruling. Sullivan has examined all the evidence. Sullivan understands the witness tampering in exhaustive detail. Sullivan understands the obstruction of justice. Sullivan understands everything. And Sullivan has exhausted his patience with Trump defying court orders. Sullivan has concluded the games and the delays and the legal tactics. Sullivan stands ready to enforce his authority with federal marshals approaching the White House and jail time awaiting in federal prison. And Trump finally internalizes that reality. Trump finally grasps it completely. The game has concluded, the courts have prevailed, and now the only question concerns managing the fallout and what occurs next. So Trump sits in the White House, though not in the Oval Office any longer because that space belongs to President Vance now, but somewhere in the residence in a private room. And Trump attempts every conceivable approach. Perhaps he attempts to contact Vance and appeal personally. Perhaps he attempts to negotiate and discover whether any presidential power remains leverageable. Perhaps he attempts to contact allies in Congress who voted to remove him. Perhaps he attempts to reach his most devoted supporters. Perhaps he attempts every possible angle seeking someone, anyone who can render assistance. But nothing functions. Vance refuses his calls or communicates clearly that he will not intervene or assist with a pardon. Congress has abandoned him completely. His supporters cannot do anything legally to rescue him. His attorneys continue repeating the identical message. You must resign. No alternative option exists. No strategy will succeed. And Trump finally comprehends that he is utterly and completely alone. His own party removed him through the 25th Amendment. His own senators voted him out of office. His own vice president refuses to assist him. And now the courts are advancing. Sullivan is advancing. Federal marshals are advancing. And Trump finds himself trapped with nowhere to flee and nowhere to conceal himself. And that is when the complete emotional disintegration occurs. That is when Trump can no longer maintain composure. That is when Trump finally understands in a visceral, deeply personal manner that this is authentically the conclusion. Not theoretical, not political, real. His presidency has vanished forever. His freedom hangs in serious jeopardy. His entire existence is about to transform dramatically and permanently, and Trump cannot emotionally process that reality. Trump cannot accept it. Trump cannot manage it. And Trump fractures completely. He begins sobbing. He breaks down weeping inside the White House while Vance conducts actual presidential business in the Oval Office. And in that moment of absolute desperation, in that moment of total isolation and overwhelming terror, Trump does something entirely uncharacteristic. Trump records a voice message, not a social media post. Not a public statement, just a voice message. Help me. That is all he can articulate. Help me. A desperate plea from a man who finally comprehends that he has lost everything and no one remains who can rescue him. And then Sullivan's deadline commences its countdown. 24 hours. Trump must decide. Does he resign or does he confront arrest? And Trump understands what resignation signifies. It means admitting defeat. It means humiliation. It means his presidency has terminated. It means his political movement stands discredited. It means everything he constructed lies destroyed. But the alternative is prison, life in federal prison. And however intensely Trump despises the concept of resignation, Trump despises the concept of prison even more profoundly. Trump has never experienced incarceration. Trump does not truly comprehend what prison entails. Prison means forfeiting freedom. Prison means his wealth becomes irrelevant. Prison means his power becomes meaningless. Prison means he becomes merely another inmate. And that prospect terrifies him beyond measure. So Trump records a voice message. Help me. Not directed to the courts, not directed to Vance. Just help me. A desperate plea from a man who finally understands he has lost everything. And that voice message leaks. Everyone hears it. The world hears Trump in his moment of complete desperation. And that moment defines the termination of the Trump presidency. Not the 25th Amendment vote, not even Sullivan's contempt ruling, but that moment of desperation. That moment when Trump finally shatters completely. And what unfolds next is the practical dimension occurring simultaneously. Trump's team exists in complete chaos. His attorneys plead with him to resign and exit the White House before marshals arrive. His staff scrambles and begins seeking new employment beyond government. Republicans rapidly distance themselves from him. Media coverage of the breakdown continues without interruption. Every network replays the audio of Trump weeping in Sullivan's courtroom. Epstein survivors celebrate outside the courthouse following the ruling. New victims file additional lawsuits now that the evidence has emerged in court. Now that Sullivan has exposed everything in the contempt ruling, the legal floodgates have opened. And the pressure on Trump to resign is absolutely overwhelming. It originates from every single direction simultaneously. His attorneys instructing him to depart. The courts informing him he possesses 24 hours. The media broadcasting his breakdown. The survivors celebrating his downfall. The evidence being exposed everywhere. And Trump stands completely alone. He occupies a room in the White House, technically not the Oval Office any longer because Vance resides there as the actual president, but wherever Trump is located, he remains completely isolated. And then noon arrives. 24 hours after Sullivan's ruling, and Trump confronts the choice. Does he resign or does he face arrest? And by this point, the answer has become unmistakably clear. Trump resigns. Trump cannot face the alternative. Trump cannot face federal marshals escorting him out in restraints. Trump cannot face a life sentence in federal prison. So Trump resigns. Trump announces to the nation that he is stepping down. Trump admits defeat, and in that moment, it is finally concluded. The presidency has terminated. Trump's political movement has collapsed. His legal exposure is about to become authentic. And the courts may proceed with prosecution, and what follows is the legal aftermath. The new Attorney General under President Vance pursues witness tampering charges. Trump faces trial. Evidence emerges in court regarding the Epstein cover-up. The Bondi Memorandum enters into evidence. The witness tampering receives documentation, the obstruction receives proof. And Trump faces conviction. Trump receives sentencing, and Trump proceeds to federal prison. That constitutes the scenario. That is how Sullivan's contempt ruling actually becomes the mechanism that forces Trump from office, not the 25th Amendment, not the Senate vote. Sullivan's contempt ruling with a clear deadline and genuine consequences. That is what finally shatters Trump. That is what finally terminates his presidency, because Trump can handle political pressure and legal threats in abstraction. But Trump cannot handle the immediate reality of federal marshals and a life sentence. Trump cannot handle actually losing his freedom. And when Sullivan forces that choice, when Sullivan presents Trump with an ultimatum carrying an immovable deadline, that is when Trump finally fractures. That is when the presidency finally concludes.